Everybody, my name is Holly Smith. I'm with GMA. I just want to say thank you for joining us today's webinar and to remind you guys that we do have a full series of additional webinars coming up over the next several weeks. Visit our website at mygma.org for more information. Today we're hosting How to Protect Your Business from Cyber Attacks, presented by Barry Utesch of Total Computer Solutions. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We will bring them up at the end of the presentation during our Q&A. Our presenter today has a degree in Information Systems from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and is the founder and president of Total Computer Solutions. He has been helping businesses with their computer technology in Central North Carolina for more than 32 years. Total Computer Solutions is a full-service provider of IT support and services, including network security, cloud computing, network administration, and managed backup services. We'll turn it over to Barry.
Thank you so much, Holly. Well, good morning, everyone. We have a fairly serious topic to discuss this morning. And I got an email from my sister the other day, so I want to start with just a little bit of humor. So this is the shelter at home humor. And I'll just read you a few of these days. So day 4, removed my day pajamas and put on my night pajamas. Day 5 is, today I tried to make hand sanitizer and it came out as Jell-O shots. Day 6, I get to take the garbage out. I'm so excited. I can't decide what to wear. And then day 8 says, went to a new restaurant called The Kitchen. You have to gather all the ingredients and make your own meal. I have no clue how this place is still in business. Well, again, cybersecurity is not a laughing matter. It's a fairly serious topic. And we've been helping clients with this for many years and hope that what we can bring to you today will be of value. I'd like to start us off with a fairly short video that will give you some insight into maybe how a cyber criminal thinks. And so bear with me one second here.
How did you decide to become a hacker?
Well, I'm not really sure what it means to become a hacker. That's like some guy in a hoodie who types really fast and stays up all night writing code and cracking passwords. It's not me. I just spy on people and see what makes them click. It's not a bad job.
Mark Hanning, CEO of Qualicart, set to report earnings after their blockbuster IPO.
So you consider this a job?
I put a lot of work into this. I'm not lazy. It takes research to figure out the key players, learn all about them, their families, their friends, what they care about. You have to understand the company's organization. I get a lot of my information from the sales department because they're always so quick and eager. They're hungry. People trust too easily. They don't look at the details. I do. Details matter. That's what I'm good at. It has to look completely believable. It has to look familiar. This is where research is important. It's not some generic piece of spam. It's an email from their boss with their company's signature. It's written in the voice of the boss. It's what he would say if he were writing this.
What about the malware itself? How does that work?
Somebody else out there already wrote all the code that does the actual attack. I'm just using it in the attachment. My skill is in my ability to get a bunch of people to click on that attachment. I always wonder what it's like when the whole thing unfolds on their end, when the panic sets in.
Please leave your message after the beep. Hey, this is Rajiv in finance. Call me as soon as you get this. Something's up with my laptop. I can't.
Katie, are you on your way into the office? Something's going on with our file servers.
Karen in HR, our benefits dashboard seems really slow. We're getting calls from users on it. Give me a call when you get this. Joining conference now.
Apparently, there's a malware attack targeting our main.
It's ransomware. They're holding us hostage.
We're locked out of everything. I can't even check my phone. What about the backup?
That will take days.
We need this fixed now. Just pay it. We don't have a choice. We're reporting earnings in 2 hours.
But how do we know
Just
that they'll...
pay it. Put every single person on getting us back up and running. That's the only priority now.
Okay, it's done.
I have the decrypt key. Mark, we have a big problem. The ransomware was just to distract us. They got inside. They got everything. Customer data, financials, everything.
Qualicards is reeling today from the news that hackers have released the personal information of nearly
The
2
Nasdaq
million
closed
customers.
lower today, led by Qualicart, which was down 14% on news that the recent data breach may be far worse than the company
Its
originally
stock fell to a
acknowledged.
new all-time low on news that CEO Mark Hanning is stepping down after what is turning out to be one of the worst breaches of personal information in recent history.
Do you feel bad about releasing the personal information? All the financials? All the money that was lost?
All I did was get the files. I'm not the one that decided to release them. I'm not the one that shorted the stock. Somebody else had their reasons for that. It's above my pay grade. I was paid to do a job, and I did it well. And that's what's expected of anyone, isn't it? Anyway, markets bounce back.
So, according to Business Insider, there'll be 24 billion connected devices on the planet this year. Many of you may have heard of the Internet of Things, and that is, trying to get rid of this thing. There we go. Hackers can automate attacks through the Internet of Things. If you've got a Nest camera, doorbell camera at home, if you have wireless access points, if you have a smart refrigerator, a smart garage door opener, they are able to use these devices to potentially connect to and gain access to your information. Again, they use bots, they use malicious websites. According to Symantec Internet Security Report, vulnerabilities regarding the Internet of Things will increase by 600% in the next year. Small businesses often feel like that they are not targets for cyber criminals. And yet the reality is cyber criminals throw a big net out there, and they don't care whether it's a small business, a large business, or even a personal computer. But unfortunately, small businesses, because of resources, don't spend the time and effort to help prevent the cyber criminals. And most or the cyber security experts were questioned, and 68% of those didn't feel like their cybersecurity risks were up to snuff. So what kind of criminals are out there? Well, there's a number of different kinds, and there is some overlap, right? The social engineer is trying to trick you through to click something, to open an attachment, to act on an email or on a notification. The spear phisher is a much more targeted attack. They're specifically picking on a certain person or a certain entity. The best example of that I've heard is was at a Chamber of Commerce event for North Carolina in Durham a couple of years ago, and an FBI agent was speaking, and I think it was 8 or 9 years ago that the Pentagon was breached, if you will. And as they did the forensics on that, what they discovered was that a CEO that worked for, or that ran a business that supplied parts to the Defense Department. He lived in Maryland, and his kids attended a private school there. And one morning he got a text, and it said, "Hey, the private school's on lockdown. Everything's okay, but we just wanted to let you as a parent know." And he turned on the news, and sure enough, it was on the news. So it was actually happening. And then a couple hours later, he received an email from the headmaster of the school, and it was a little more information about the lockdown. And it had a PDF attachment. So he opened the PDF attachment and he read it, and he thought, that's odd. That really isn't telling me any more information than what I'd kind of already known. And but he didn't think anything else about it and went on about his day. Well, that PDF attachment actually installed a piece of code onto his computer, and the hackers spent the next year or more working their way up the food chain, if you will, until they were able to actually gain access to the Department of Defense. So again, a very, very targeted attack called spear phishing. You know, many of us think of the hacker, the person who is out there just looking for opportunities. I had a buddy who had a business where he had the retail part of the business and the office part of the business were sort of mixed together. And he put some cameras up so that if he was in one corner of the showroom, if you will, he could look into the other parts of the showroom. And he was there one evening working on reconciling his bank statement. And a voice spoke to him from behind and said, "Hey, I wouldn't leave all that out where anybody can see it." And he turned around and looked, and again, he'd installed the I'm sorry, I moved my arm and I tapped the mute button on my headset. Sorry about that. So the hacker, I was talking about that he had connected to this network and was looking over the web cameras at this person reconciling the bank statement. And it was because he had failed to change the username and the password. He'd left the defaults in there. And as a result, the guy was able to find it and actually watch through his cameras. Rogue employees, I think about the Equifax breach that happened. Was that really a piece of malware that came in through email? Was it a rogue employee that got offered, $20,000 to let him in? Hard to say, but certainly something to be cognizant about. And then the ransomware artist, that person who crafts, like our video, crafts a very elaborate attack and is able to gain access to a specific business. So again, cybersecurity is often perceived as more costly than a small business can afford, and that and an organization's lack of knowledge resources is the challenges that businesses face in adopting cybersecurity practices. And it's really, it's the perception, it's not necessarily the reality. And I hope by the end of our webinar today that you'll have some ideas about how you can beef up the cybersecurity in your organization and do it for a reasonable number. So again, most of the time, small businesses say, nobody really wants my stuff. I don't have anything of value. I don't keep credit card information. I don't keep healthcare information, etc. But I would suggest to you that the cyber criminals are gathering pieces of information, right? In the same way that that Google or Amazon or Facebook, over time, they are collecting more and more information about you. And the more information that they have on you, the better job they can do of targeting advertising and other content to you. Well, the bad guys are basically doing the same thing, right? So they start with getting an email address. Maybe they get a part of a phone number, a home address, and get part of a username or part of a password. So again, they're collecting bits and pieces of information and combining those to be able to do a more specific attack. If any of you are working with a large publicly traded company, again, you may not see the danger for you, but if you'll recall, when Target was hacked a few years back, Target was not hacked directly. Basically, the bad guys were able to gain access to a small refrigeration contractor that worked with Target. The name of the company was Fazio Mechanical. So they were able to, the bad guys were able to gain access to the Fazio Mechanical network. And then they waited and they watched and they were very patient. And they discovered that from time to time, a connection was established with some other entity. And so they followed that connection to that other entity, and then they installed their software on that device, and they were able to get into that device directly. And then they realized, oh my goodness, this is Target. We're inside the Target network. And they spent the next months writing software code that would be deployed to all the credit card terminals at Target. And so on that morning, when they pulled the trigger and installed new software on all the credit card terminals, for the first 3 or 4 hours of the day, every transaction went into their bank account, not the Target bank account. And so again, the bad guys are patient, and if you do business with a large entity, and there is a possibility that they could use you as a hop-off point to get into that larger entity. And needless to say, that would severely damage your reputation and probably your ability to do business with that larger company. The Sony hack from a number of years ago, again, they weren't really trying to steal dollars from Sony, right? They stole, or they were able to get into Sony. They were able to release some movies that Sony had not yet announced, and as a result, they really squashed the announcement of those films. They gave the bootleggers a really nice early Christmas gift. That was, I don't know if you remember this, but it was a very embarrassing, because they released a bunch of internal emails, and they were talking about payroll things. They were talking about employee issues, and not to mention the fact that they released almost 47,000 employee social security numbers and email addresses. And the FBI admitted that the malware that was used in the attack on Sony was so sophisticated that it would have bypassed 90% of security defenses, which means, again, if a big company like that can be breached, how do we protect ourselves as a smaller business? Not all malware attacks are about data leakage, right? So there's the most common type of malware attack is a phishing attack. That's where you receive an email and the bad guys are attempting to get you to either click on a link or open an attachment. Yes, that is a form of social engineering. Although again, this back to this Durham event, you know, the FBI agent was talking about a individual in a Spectrum truck with a Spectrum logoed shirt on, walked into a business, said, "Hey, I need to get to your telephone room." And the receptionist said, "Well, hang on, let me get the IT guys to let you back there." And the IT guys came out. The Spectrum person was gone. They said, "What happened to him? I don't know." They ended up calling over to Spectrum and saying, "Hey, did you send somebody over here today?" And Spectrum said, "No, we didn't send anybody there." And so again, social engineering, you know, if that receptionist would have let him into that back room, who knows what might have transpired. Password sniffing, that's simply where they put a piece of software on your computer, and then as you type your passwords in, they basically pick up that information. Malvertising, don't see as much malvertising today as we used to, but that's where you are on a web page and an advertisement shows, you know, how to get a 20% discount on a new Toyota. But if you click on that link, you think it's taking you to Toyota, but it actually isn't. It's taking you somewhere else, which then allows that bad guy to install software onto your computer. The websites have gotten better about blocking that, but it still happens. Browser hijacking and DNS hijacking are similar, where you click on one thing and you think that you're going somewhere and you end up being taken somewhere very different. So again, I mentioned this, the human element, right? 92% of malware comes through email. 47% of malicious email attachments are Office files. 34% of data breaches involve internal actors. And again, not necessarily a bad person in the office, but a careless person in the office. And then 65% of groups use spear phishing. So again, I guess I mentioned this to say, unless every employee is trained in proper cybersecurity practices, you really are putting your business at risk. Most cybercrime doesn't occur through technologically hacking a computer or a firewall, right? Like they do in the movies. What it really comes is it's human error. That's the social engineering. That's really where most of it comes from. According to a Verizon study, a breach investigation report, insiders are responsible for about 25% of data breaches. And that number is really high if you think about it. You want to trust your employees and you want them to act in the best interest of your company. You should be careful if you have a disgruntled employee or somebody who's getting ready to exit, that they would be a more likely prospect for that. According to a Wombat Security, 76% of businesses reported phishing attacks happening within the last year. And again, these attacks most likely involve employees and human error. To date, about 53% of businesses do require some employee training on ransomware and privacy policies, but that really needs to be much higher. So again, what is social engineering? I imagine you, like myself, have received that that very poorly written letter from some king in Africa who, if you'll send him $300, he'll send you $30,000. And you know, it's interesting. I've never been tempted to click on one of those. It seemed like it was pretty clear, and yet they still send them. So they must occasionally get a hit. I was at home one morning a few years back, and my wife received a phone call. She sat down at the computer and started doing some things, and after a little while, her spidey senses were tingling, and she got up and said, "Here, I want you to talk to this guy. He's from Microsoft." And he was trying to get us to add some software to our computer because he said that we were sending out tons of spam, and that if we didn't do it, that Microsoft was going to have to cut us off from the internet. And I obviously knew that this was not a legitimate phone call. And but again, it was a local number, or it was a U.S. based number. And again, these types of things are still happening. Again, what if you found this USB drive in the parking lot? Right? Would you be tempted to plug that in? You know, what if it said Bill and Sally's wedding photos or cute cat photos, whatever? Anyway, just lots of different ways for the bad guys to break in. And so again, social engineering tactics, fooling a human is a lot easier than hacking a computer, right? And it doesn't matter how many locks are on the doors and windows at your house. It doesn't matter if you have a barbed wire or a high-tech alarm system. You know, if the person that rings the doorbell says they're the electrician that's there, and you let them in without confirming that, you're exposing the business to risk. I was having dinner with my family and had my phone nearby, and I received a text from Wells Fargo, and they said that there had been a transaction for $600 or something like that, which was a big number, especially since we were all right there at the table. And it said, click this link to learn more. And I almost clicked the link, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna log in to my Wells Fargo app, and I'm gonna look in the communication or the notes part of that and see what I see in there. And so I did that. I logged in, took a look. There was no information about a large transaction. I went back to the text and started studying it a little more carefully, and realized that it was not from Wells Fargo, but again, it had the logo, it had the right colors, all those things looked very, very good. And if I hadn't slowed down a little bit, I would have clicked on it. So the most dangerous social engineering threats to organizations is the lack of employee awareness. Again, you can put in an awful lot of software, you can put in an awful lot of tools, if you will, to try to prevent infection in your organization. But if your employee clicks, there's really not much that you can do about it. I gave a abbreviated version of this presentation to my Rotary Club a few years ago, and a gentleman came up to me afterwards. He was with a Big 8 accounting firm, and he had been doing an audit recently for a fairly large corporation, and there was a $1 million line item on the balance sheet without a lot of information around it. So he approached the CEO, and the CEO explained the story to him. And he said that someone in the accounting department had received an email that appeared to be from the CEO, and that CEO was definitely traveling in Europe at the time. And it said to this accounting person, it said, I've been working on a business acquisition over here with this company, and we need to do an initial transfer of funds because we need to put a down payment on this transaction. And I don't want you to talk to anybody in the office. And I don't want you to mention this to anyone. And I want you to do exactly what you need to do to make this happen so that we don't lose this opportunity. And then he said, you'll be receiving an email from the law firm in just a few minutes, giving you the specifics about wire transfer information that you need to do. And so the employee very dutifully didn't mention it to anybody. He received the email from the law firm that they used in the next state, and it gave him the specific information that he needed to do to transfer that $1 million. And needless to say, that $1 million landed in a stateside bank for about a second, and then it was forwarded overseas, and it was gone. And so anytime you see an email that encourages you to act very quickly and to not say anything, that should send up red flags. If you do wire transfers, I would strongly encourage you to always confirm your wire transfers with a voice call, and not just confirm the fact that you want it to happen, but actually confirm account numbers. Had another client actually that the CEO received a pop-up message or an email, I guess is actually what it was. And it said, hey, you've been logged out of your Microsoft Office 365 account. Click here to log back in. And so he did that and didn't think anything else about it. And it was 6 months or almost a year later, they were in negotiations to acquire another company. And they received an email from the law firm saying, here's where you need to transfer the money to. And they transferred the money. It was a Friday afternoon. Didn't hear anything from the law firm Monday. Didn't hear anything from the law firm Tuesday. Called them on Wednesday and said, hey, what's going on? Why haven't we gotten the paperwork to sign, et cetera? And the law firm said, well, we haven't gotten the money yet. And so what had happened was when that CEO received that email and logged back into his Microsoft account, what he did was effectively, he gave his username and password to some bad actors. They implemented forwarding rules in his email so that they were receiving all of the inbound and all the outbound emails that were coming to him. And then they sat and waited patiently. And it took a while, but they were able to, at the end of this thing, they were able to capture that email from the law firm to the CEO. They were able to change the bank routing numbers, and as a result, that money went to them and not to the law firm where it was supposed to go. So again, training your employees, ransomware, which is where a piece of software gets installed on your computer. It encrypts or locks all of your files, and you have to pay a ransom to get your files back, or to get the decrypt key so you can unencrypt all your files. And this is very effective even on a home computer. If you think about it, if you've got all your photographs on your home computer and that was to all be encrypted so that you could no longer see any of those photos, what would you be willing to pay to get your photographs back? Yeah, you might not be willing to pay $10,000, but you might be willing to pay $500 or $1,000. And again, that symbol there is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is typically how folks in the ransomware business want to be paid, and it's untrackable, untraceable, so they can disappear into the night, and you're never going to see those dollars back. And are you really sure that they've taken that malware off of your computer? If you don't have a good backup, you're going to have to pay the ransomware, and that is unequivocal. If you've got to have a good backup. So it says a quarter of all companies will pay $20,000 to hackers to retrieve their data. In the video that I showed at the beginning, they mentioned the fact that to restore from backup would take days. And that's true for most large companies. The amount of data that they have is so massive, even just copying it from point A to point B takes days. And so they can't wait that long. And so they end up having to pay. There's been some ransomware attacks of hospitals in the past number of years. And they were especially vulnerable to that because they couldn't afford to be down for a day and a half. And so they would end up paying and then getting their data back. The FBI at this same Chamber of Commerce event they strongly encouraged all businesses to not pay. And one of their points was, obviously, if you pay, you encourage the behavior. But the second point that they made, which I hadn't really thought about, was, this could be Al Qaeda, it could be, North Korea. I mean, it could be nation states and organizations that are using this money to fund terrorism and to fund, the killing of many, many people. And so paying the ransom is never a good idea. Again, if you have a good backup and you can afford the time, you don't want to pay. Industries that are under attack. Well, financial and manufacturing services that are being attacked, healthcare, pharma, and then small businesses. Another one that I think has been in the news a lot lately is large government organizations. I think about the city of Baltimore. They were hacked in mid 2019. Atlanta was also hacked in 2019, and Charlotte, Mecklenburg, that might have been the year before that. But they also were, were infected with ransomware. So again, they're not really necessarily trying to take the information. Some are, but if they can just lock the information and make you have to pay to get it back. Do you find yourself guilty of any of the following, right? Are you running outdated software? Maybe even an outdated operating system? Windows 7 went out of support back in, I think it was December. And so hopefully nobody is running that. But again, staying current with software is a huge deterrent to the bad guys. I can't remember the name of the actual malware product. I want to say Red Tide, but that's not quite right. Code Red, that's what it was. But that infected a bunch of computers a few years back. And the interesting thing was that Microsoft had released a security patch for Code Red like a year before, but people hadn't installed it. And so they were vulnerable to that Code Red virus. Not having antivirus or up-to-date antivirus is certainly a huge problem. Password policies, password advice has changed a lot. The bad guys have gotten much more sophisticated at cracking passwords. And so what they're telling us now, NIST, NIST.gov, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST.gov, they're telling us to make your passwords longer. A 6-digit passcode can be hacked pretty quickly, like 15 to 20 minutes. So having a 12 or a 15-digit passphrase makes your password so difficult to break that they're going to move on and find an easier target. The use of public Wi-Fi. I was traveling a few months back with my sons, and we were in the airport, and the rental car information that I had in my phone ended up being incorrect. And so I pulled out my laptop and I went to fire it up and was going to jump on the airport Wi-Fi to look that up. And I was going to have to look it up in my credit card because that's where I booked it, in my credit card. And I got about 1 or 2 steps forward and I was like, wait a minute, this is a really bad idea. And I ended up making my phone a hotspot. I connected my laptop to the hotspot and I went to the credit card company that way. So again, never, ever, ever enter password information through a public Wi-Fi. I mentioned the story earlier about the CEO that was traveling in Europe and lost $1 million. He's posting information on his social media telling where he is and what he's doing, giving the bad guys all the information that they need to pull off that wire transfer fraud. Two-factor authentication. I hope you have that set up on your banking sites. It's just a great idea. You can also set it up on Office 365 where that will require two-factor authentication. That makes it significantly more difficult for the bad guys to get in. They're figuring out ways to do it. You know, this is sort of a game of leapfrog, but that does slow them down significantly. Banking alerts, if you don't have those turned on, I would encourage you to turn those on so that you know if a transaction happens. And again, thinking that cyber criminals don't want your information is a very dangerous place to be. Yeah. Again, opening emails from unknown senders is obvious, but you got to be careful even from known senders. And then opening any type of an attachment, whether it's a known or unknown person, is something I would discourage. I'll actually pick up the phone and call them and say, "Hey, did you send that to me?" And I know that's a pain, but I have become extremely vigilant in order to try to stay or keep from getting infected. So we haven't really talked about the costs, and of course there's tangible costs and there's intangible costs. You know, used to be that we would see ransomware in the range of low or high hundreds, so $500, $800, $1,000, something like that. But more recently, we've seen numbers in the $10,000 kind of range. So actually paying the ransom is expensive. If you're in any kind of a regulated industry, whether it's HIPAA or Sarbanes, you've got to notify all your clients that this has happened. And that's painful and it's expensive. The cost of the cleanup is oftentimes greater than the cost of protection because once you've been breached, you may have to be replacing all those servers, replacing all those desktops. You end up having to do it anyway. So why not do it proactively? If you are a regulated industry, there'll need to be a technical investigation. Obviously, if you're shut down for a period of time, there's lost revenue. If you're in the services industry and your employee or your customers hear that you've been breached, you're going to lose market share. No way around it. And then the money that you have to spend to beef up security. If you have insurance, and hopefully you've looked at it, typically cyber insurance, you can buy that as a rider to your existing business policy. If you haven't looked at it, you should. I don't think it's as expensive as maybe your fear. The operational disruption, right? Having to tell people, well, I'm sorry, our systems are down for the next 3 days. We can't help you with that. And it can be a PR nightmare, especially if you're a good sized company and publicly traded, et cetera, where that information gets out. It's going to be difficult. Again, devaluation of the brand, your service levels are compromised, lost contracts to clients, employee trust, and just, turnover. When Target was breached, back when they were breached, I didn't shop there for 6 months. I just felt like, they're obviously not doing a good job of keeping their security. If you'll recall, it was a number of years ago, but Verizon bought Yahoo, and it was in the papers that there was a transaction coming, and literally a week or two before they were supposed to close, Yahoo was compromised. Their email was compromised. And what you may not recall is that Verizon lowered their offering price for Yahoo by about $350 million as a result of that breach. So again, they can be costly. Breaches can be costly. 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses, and based on the study, only about 14% are actually prepared to defend themselves. We hear numbers tossed about. They say that it costs about $200,000 on average, and then about to recover from a cyber breach, and that about 60% of those businesses ultimately go out of business within 6 months. If you were basically locked up for a week and then had to spend a bunch of money on updated IT, you could see how that might happen. So again, I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to mention it again. Good backups. You cannot recover unless you have a good backup. When I say a good backup, let me emphasize too, if your backup is connected all the time to your computers, to your network, when ransomware attacks, it crawls your entire network. It's going to discover that backup, and it's going to encrypt that backup as well. So you really have to have a backup that you do and then you disconnect. Now again, we have ways of achieving that by having a device that's not on the network, right? But that's a little bit more advanced. Be happy to talk with you about that if that's of interest. But again, if your backup is connected and discoverable, then the ransomware is going to find it and encrypt it. And again, you may pay and you may get your data back, but there's always a concern of, did they really go away? All right, so we're going to talk about the antidote to this problem, right? You got to deal with the human factor. You've got to train your employees. It's not expensive, but if they can be conned, there's very little that you can do to protect yourself. So it's creating an action plan, train your employees, train them regularly. Are you blocking on inappropriate websites? So you can fairly easily do this, where you can go in and say, hey, we're not going to allow our employees to go to porn sites. We're not going to allow them to go to job search sites. We're not going to allow them to go places that they don't need to be going. They have no business reason to go. And then, keeping smartphones. I added a passcode to my smartphone a number of years ago, and it was a pain. It took me, a month or better to get used to having to unlock my phone every time I used it. But it's a good best practice. It's the kind of low-hanging fruit that really doesn't cost money that you need to be doing. When's the last time you changed your Wi-Fi password at your office? That's an easy way for somebody parked in the parking lot to get in. So securing Wi-Fi and just changing passwords with some frequency. Regularly scanning, monitoring your data, making sure there's not some piece of software sitting there quietly watching. And again, just a lot of these things are not complicated, but just don't be complacent in what you're doing. Make sure you're updating, patching your devices, all those types of things. Security is really a layered approach. In the same way that you make bulletproof glass by taking different substrates and mushing those together, you create a piece of glass that you can see through, but that will stop a bullet. Now, will it stop every bullet? No, it won't. But it will stop. If it can stop most of them, then you've really you've solved your issue. And again, we would suggest those are and these are in order, right? User training is critical. Patching, security updates on all your devices, including your phones. Having an up-to-date firewall appliance. There's lots of things you can do on a modern firewall that maybe weren't possible a few years back. Having up-to-date malware software that's protecting your systems. Making your passwords a little more complicated. Don't reuse passwords, right? You hear that all the time, but we still do it, don't we? But making them longer, making them 10 characters, 12 characters, and then content filtering, not allowing people to just go wherever they want to go when they go out on the internet, but limiting some of those things. So as we wrap up, just a reminder, it can happen to you, and the size of your business does not really matter. Your users are the weakest link, and they need to be trained, and it can be extremely costly to have a cyber attack, and can even put you out of business. So again, thank you so much for being here today, and we've got a free ebook that we'd like to give to you.